If you can't sleep tonight because you feel like you're never doing enough, if the weight of your responsibilities seems to be crushing you, if you compare yourself to others and feel like you fall short, stop for a moment and breathe. You're not alone in this struggle. And tonight, I want to introduce you to someone who perfectly understood that feeling of smallness, of insignificance, of not measuring up. Her name was Thérèse Martin, but the world would come to know her as Saint Thérèse of Lisieux. And what was extraordinary about her was that she never tried to be great. She never sought heroic feats or impressive works. Instead, she discovered something revolutionary, that God doesn't need us to be extraordinary to love us infinitely, that the deepest love can be lived out in the smallest gestures, that holiness is not a matter of size, but of heart. If you've ever felt that your life is too ordinary, too simple, too small to matter, Teresa has something important to tell you. She called her discovery the little path, and that path changed not only her life, but the lives of millions of people who, like you and me, feel overwhelmed by expectations of greatness. Tonight, as darkness envelops you and sleep approaches, I want you to meet this young French woman who died at 24, having accomplished nothing important by worldly standards, and yet became one of the most beloved saints of all time. I want you to discover how her insignificance became her greatest strength, how her weakness opened the gates of heaven for her, how her acceptance of being a small flower made her one of the doctors of the church. Because you see, Teresa wasn't afraid of being small. She was afraid of not being loved in her smallness. And when she discovered that God loved her precisely for that reason, for being small, everything changed. Her life became a love song hidden in the ordinary, a dance of grace woven into insignificant moments, a spiritual revolution disguised as simplicity. So if you brought your worries here tonight, if you came carrying the feeling that you're not enough, that your efforts are too small to matter, stay. Because Teresa's story is also your story. It's the story of all of us who have ever felt lost in the vastness of the world, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But Teresa discovered a secret the world needs to hear, that in God's eyes, nothing you do with love is insignificant, that every smile offered in the midst of weariness, every kind word spoken when you'd rather remain silent, every act of patience when you feel at your limit, all of it, absolutely everything, is precious to God. All of it builds a path to heaven. And the most beautiful thing is that this path doesn't require extraordinary strength. It doesn't demand special talents. It doesn't ask you to be someone you're not. It only asks you to be yourself, with all your smallness, all your limitations, all your imperfections. Because in that smallness, God can work wonders. Teresa understood this so profoundly that she completely transformed the spirituality of her time. While others sought holiness in great penances and heroic deeds, she found it in smiling at a difficult sister, in picking up a pin from the floor out of love, in offering the best chair to someone else. Holiness hidden in the everyday, immense love in tiny gestures. Tonight, as your story unfolds like gently falling rose petals, allow yourself to rest in this truth. You don't need to be more than you are. You don't need to accomplish great things. You don't need to impress anyone, not even God. He already loves you, completely, infinitely, just as you are. And now close your eyes if you like. Relax your shoulders. Let go of the day's weight. Because we're going to travel together to France at the end of the 19th century, to a small town called Lisieux. We're going to meet an extraordinarily ordinary girl who became a master of the small things. We're going to discover how a simple flower can fill an entire cathedral with its fragrance. And perhaps, just perhaps, at the end of this night you will discover that you too are that flower. Small, yes, but infinitely loved, infinitely precious, infinitely capable of transforming the world with your simple love. Welcome to Saints to Sleep By. This is the story of Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, the story of the little way, your story. Thérèse Martin was born on January 2nd, 1873, in Alençon, a quiet town in northern France. She was the youngest of 9 children, though only 5 of her daughters would reach adulthood. Her parents, Louis and Zélie Martin, were extraordinarily devout and loving. Louis was a watchmaker and jeweler, a man of profound inner life and great tenderness. Zélie made Alençon lace, a meticulous craft that required infinite patience. Both had considered religious life in their youth, but God had other plans for them, to raise a family that would be a seedbed of holiness. Little Teresa, affectionately called the little queen of the family, grew up surrounded by tender and constant love. The Martin home wasn't opulent, but it overflowed with joy, faith, and mutual devotion. Every night, the family gathered to pray. Sundays were sacred. Charity toward those in need was a daily practice. In that environment, Teresa blossomed into a lively, intelligent, and deeply sensitive child. But even in that paradise of love, Teresa displayed an emotional intensity that sometimes worried her parents. She was extremely sensitive, capable of crying at the slightest upset. Her mother wrote in her letters about little Teresa, "She is a very intelligent child, but she is so sensitive that she cries at anything." It wasn't capriciousness or spoiled behavior. It was genuine sensitivity, a total openness of heart that grasped every nuance of emotion around her. When Teresa was just 4.5 years old, her world collapsed. Her beloved mother, Zélie, died of breast cancer on August 28, 1877. Teresa was too young to fully grasp the meaning of death, but aware enough to feel the heartbreaking emptiness left by her mother's absence. Years later, Teresa would write, "The first period of my life ended with my mother's death. If you have ever lost someone you loved deeply, if you know that indescribable pain that settles in your chest like an unbearable weight, then you understand what that 4-year-old girl felt." Teresa's world, which until then had been a safe haven of love, cracked. And in that crack, something began to form that would define her spirituality, an awareness of human fragility, of our insignificance before the mystery of life and death. After Zélie's death, Louis Martin moved with his 5 daughters to Lisieux to be near his brother-in-law's family. They settled in a beautiful house called Les Buissonnets, the Bushes. There, Louis tried to be both father and mother to his girls. Pauline, the eldest, took on an almost maternal role with Thérèse. The bond between them was deep and tender. Pauline became Thérèse's second mother, her confidant, her guide, her comfort. But her mother's death had transformed Teresa. The lively, cheerful girl became more reserved, more prone to tears, more sensitive to any harsh word or gesture of rejection. She developed what she herself would later call extreme sensitivity. It wasn't a weakness of character. It was an openness of heart so great that every small wound felt like a deep stab. Imagine being a child with a heart so open that every word, every glance, every silence resonates within you like an endless echo. Imagine feeling not only your own emotions, but also capturing those of everyone around you, like a sponge absorbing all the water in the ocean. That's how Teresa was. And that sensitivity, which seemed like a heavy burden, would eventually become her greatest gift. The years passed relatively peacefully in Les Buissonnets. Teresa attended school with the Benedictine nuns, where she was a diligent but shy student. She had few friends. Her world revolved mainly around her family. Sundays were special. Long walks with her father through the countryside. Profound conversations for such a young girl. Moments of silent contemplation before the beauty of creation. Louis Martin adored his little queen. He had built her a special little garden where Thérèse cultivated flowers. She loved those flowers passionately, not the large, showy ones, but the small, wild ones, those that grew in humble places. Even then, without knowing it, Thérèse was developing a theology of littleness. Years later, she would write about those flowers. I understood that if all flowers wanted to be roses, nature would lose its springtime beauty. In the same way, in the world of souls, which is the garden of Jesus, there must be small flowers alongside the large ones. But another devastating blow was yet to come. When Teresa was 9 years old, her beloved Pauline, her second mother, announced that she would be entering the Carmelite convent in Lisieux. For Teresa, this was almost like losing her mother all over again. Pauline had been her anchor, her comfort, her guide. And now she would be leaving, shutting herself away behind cloistered walls, becoming inaccessible. The farewell was heartbreaking. Teresa fell into a deep sadness that soon manifested as a strange illness. She began to suffer violent tremors, hallucinations, and periods of unconsciousness. The doctors couldn't explain it. Today we might call it a psychosomatic crisis, a physical manifestation of unbearable emotional pain. Teresa was broken inside, and her body expressed that brokenness. If you've ever felt emotional pain make you physically ill, if you've experienced how anxiety manifests in your body, how fear paralyzes you, how sadness drains you until you're completely powerless, then you know something of what Teresa experienced during those terrible months. Her family was desperate. They prayed without ceasing. And finally, healing came. One day, while Teresa lay in bed during one of her attacks, her sisters knelt before a statue of the Virgin Mary and begged her to heal the child. Teresa, in a moment of lucidity, also looked toward the statue. And then, something happened that changed her life forever. Later she would write, "Suddenly, the Blessed Virgin appeared beautiful to me, so beautiful that I had never seen anything so enchanting. Her face overflowed with ineffable goodness and tenderness. But what penetrated to the depths of my soul was the enchanting smile of the Blessed Virgin." At that moment, Teresa was completely healed. The tremors ceased. The hallucinations vanished. Peace flooded her heart. She would always call it the smile of the Virgin. It was her first profound mystical encounter, her first direct experience that she was not alone, that heaven was near, that there was a love greater than all the pain in the world. But the physical healing didn't eliminate her extreme sensitivity. Teresa remained the little girl who cried at anything, who felt hurt by the slightest harsh word, who lived on an exhausting emotional roller coaster. And she knew it. She felt powerless in the face of her own fragility. Then came Christmas of 1886. Teresa was 13 years old. That night, after midnight mass, the family returned home for the traditional celebration. It was customary for Louis to fill Teresa's shoes with gifts, continuing the sweet childhood tradition. But that night, tired, Louis remarked somewhat impatiently, "Well, fortunately this is the last year." Teresa was climbing the stairs when she heard these words. Normally, she would have burst into tears, hurt by the comment. But something extraordinary happened. In an instant, she felt as if an inner force transformed her completely. Her oversensitivity vanished. The weepy girl died in that moment. A strong young woman emerged. Teresa would call it her conversion, the grace of Christmas. Years later, she would write, "In an instant, Jesus, pleased with my goodwill, accomplished the work I had been unable to do in 10 years. I felt charity enter my heart, the need to forget myself in order to make others happy." If you're waiting for God to work a change in your life, if you've struggled for years with some aspect of your character that seems impossible to transform, if you feel trapped in patterns you can't break, Teresa's story whispers something important. Sometimes transformation comes in an instant, as a pure gift of grace. Not because we deserve it, not because we've worked hard enough, but because God, in His perfect timing, decides to do it. And when He does, everything changes. That Christmas marked the beginning of a new era for Teresa. The fragile girl began her transformation into the strong saint. But the strength she would develop would not be callous hardness. It would be something far more beautiful. The strength of one who knows she is small and loved. The strength of one who accepts her weakness and places it in God's hands. The power hidden in conscious humility. And now, having just turned 14, with a heart no longer enslaved by her sensitivity, but still profoundly tender, Teresa began to feel something new growing inside her. A calling. An irresistible attraction. A desire that would consume the rest of her short, but intensely vibrant life. The call came like a whisper that became a shout, like a longing that transformed into certainty. Teresa, barely 14 years old, knew with crystal clarity what God wanted of her. Carmel. She wanted to follow in the footsteps of her beloved Pauline, now Sister Agnes of Jesus. She wanted to enclose herself within those cloistered walls and dedicate her life completely to prayer and hidden love. But there was a problem. Well, several problems. The first and most obvious. She was too young. Carmelite rules stipulated that postulants had to be at least 21. Teresa was 14. The second problem, she was still considered too fragile, too sensitive, too delicate for the austere Carmelite life. And the third, perhaps the most painful, her father, her beloved Papa, would have to say goodbye to his little queen, the last of his daughters, still living with him. When Thérèse finally mustered the courage to speak to Louis about her vocation, she chose a Pentecost afternoon. They were walking together in the garden, as they had so many times before. The spring sun bathed Les Buissonnets in golden light. Thérèse, her heart pounding, began to speak. She explained that God was calling her to Carmel, that it wasn't a teenage whim, but a profound certainty, that she knew she was young, but that God's call doesn't wait for a certain age. Louis Martin listened in silence. This good man, who had dreamed of being a monk in his youth, who had seen 3 of his daughters enter the convent, understood the language of the divine calling. But his father's heart bled. It was too soon. Thérèse was still a child. Nevertheless, he looked at his daughter, saw the determination in her eyes, the clarity of her purpose, and knew that he could not deny God what God asked. With tears in his eyes, Louis bent down, picked a small white flower that grew wild among the stones, and gave it to Teresa. He explained that God had made it grow there, had tenderly protected it until that day, and now allowed it to be plucked. That's what you are like, he told her. Little flower that God wants to gather. Teresa kept that flower. She pressed it into her prayer book, and years later, when she wrote her autobiography at the request of her superiors, she would call it Story of a Soul, but it could just as easily have been called Story of a Little Flower. But her father's consent wasn't enough. Teresa also needed the permission of the superior of the Carmelite monastery, Father Delatrouet. She and Louis visited him. Teresa, summoning all her courage, explained her vocation. The priest listened to her kindly, but he was firm. She was too young. She had to wait, at least until she was 17. And even that wasn't guaranteed. Teresa left that interview heartbroken. Wait? 3 more years? For a teenager in love with God, 3 years seemed like an eternity. But she didn't give up. If you know that feeling of God calling you to something but every door seems to close, if you've experienced the frustration of knowing your vocation clearly but encountering only obstacles, then you understand Teresa's pain and determination during those months. The next step was more difficult. She needed permission from the Bishop of Bayeux, Bishop Hugonin. Louis and Thérèse travelled to see him. The interview was formal, almost cold. The bishop listened briefly, then said he would consider the matter and consult with the superior of the Carmelite monastery. Thérèse, desperate, spoke passionately about her vocation. But the bishop made no commitment. "We'll see," was his final reply. Teresa wept all the way home. She wept as she hadn't wept since her Christmas conversion. But these tears were different. They weren't tears of wounded sensitivity, but of a heart that loves so much it can't bear the waiting. If you've ever wept for something you desire with all your being but that seems unattainable, you know these tears. They are the tears of someone who has touched something real and cannot settle for less. Then Louis, seeing his daughter's suffering, made an extraordinary decision. He had planned a pilgrimage to Rome with a group from Lisieux to celebrate the priestly jubilee of Pope Leo XIII, and he decided to take Thérèse with him. Perhaps, just perhaps, if he spoke directly to the Holy Father, things would change. The trip was a revelation for Teresa. They visited Paris, then crossed the Alps into Italy. They saw Milan, Venice, Padua, Bologna, Loreto, Rome, Naples, and Pompeii. It was November of 1887. Teresa was 14 years old and had a heart burning with love for God. Each city, each basilica, each relic they visited intensified her desire for Carmel. But it also taught her something important, that the world was vast, full of souls, full of need. And she, a small flower, how could she help from within the cloister? That question would stay with her throughout her life and shape her understanding of contemplative prayer as a universal mission. Finally, the day of the papal audience arrived, November 20th, 1887. The group from Lisieux, along with other pilgrims, was received by the Pope at the Vatican. The instructions were clear: kiss the Pope's ring, receive his blessing, and proceed without speaking. The Holy Father was elderly and should not be burdened with personal requests. The pilgrims advanced in single file. Teresa, her heart pounding like a drum, drew near. When her turn came, she knelt, kissed the papal ring, and then, completely disobeying instructions, raised her eyes to the Pope and spoke. "Most Holy Father, I have come to ask you a great favor." A guard tried to silence her and make her move forward, but Teresa, with a determination that surprised everyone, continued. "Most Holy Father, in honor of your Jubilee, allow me to enter Carmel at the age of 15. Pope Leo III, surprised by this bold young woman, looked at the Vicar General of Bayeux, who was present. The vicar explained briefly, "Most Holy Father, she is a girl who wishes to enter the Carmelite order, but the superiors are considering the matter." The Pope then looked at Thérèse kindly and said to her, "Come, come, my child, do as the superiors tell you." Teresa, undeterred, clasped her hands on the Pope's knees and said vehemently, "Oh, Holy Father, if you were to say yes, everyone would agree." The Pope, moved but resolute, replied, "Come, come, you will enter if God wills it." The guards had to pry Teresa's hands from the Pope's knees to make her move forward. Teresa left that audience heartbroken. She had travelled to Rome, spoken with the Pope himself, and yet the answer was to wait. Wait for how long? Wait for what? The rest of the pilgrimage was a blur of beautiful images pierced by the pain of uncertainty. But something was happening behind the scenes. Letters were flying back and forth. The Vicar General, impressed by the young woman's determination, began to soften his stance. The bishop, informed of everything, reconsidered. And finally, on January 1st, 1888, Teresa's 15th birthday, the letter arrived that changed everything. She had permission to enter the Carmelite convent. Teresa Martin had won. But not because of her strength, not because of her intelligence, not because of her ability to persuade. She had won because of her unwavering perseverance, her humility that refused to give up, her love that refused to take no for an answer. She had won because God, in his perfect timing, opened the doors that seemed eternally closed. If you're waiting for God to open a door in your life, if you've knocked and knocked and the door seems made of iron, if you're tempted to give up, Teresa's story invites you to keep knocking, not with arrogance, not with demands, but with the confidence of someone who knows that their Father listens, that their Father loves, that their Father will answer in his own time. And that time, though it may seem like an eternity, is always perfect. On April 9th, 1888, Teresa Martin crossed the threshold of the Carmelite convent in Lisieux. She was 15 years, 3 months, and 8 days old. She was the youngest postulant that convent had ever received. Her father accompanied her to the cloister door, embraced her one last time, and watched her disappear behind those walls that would separate their lives forever in this world. Louis Martin wept as he walked back alone to Les Buissonnets. The house was empty now. All his daughters had left. 4 to the Carmelite convent, 1 to the Visitation convent. He, who had been the best of fathers, was left alone. But in his heart there was peace. He knew he had given God what God asked. And though the sacrifice hurt to his very core, he knew it was right. Teresa, on the other side of the cloister door, was beginning the greatest adventure of her life. She didn't know that she only had 9 years left in this world. She didn't know that those 9 years would transform Catholic spirituality forever. She didn't know that her smallness would become a universal message of hope. She only knew that she was where God wanted her to be, and that, in that moment and forever, was enough. The Carmelite convent of Lisieux was not an easy place. Behind those whitewashed walls, far from the romanticized image we sometimes project onto religious life, lay a demanding routine, a real austerity, and human coexistence with all its complexities. Thérèse entered expecting heaven and found earth, but it was in that arid land that she would learn to cultivate her inner garden. Carmelite life began at 5 in the morning, even in the freezing winters of northern France. The convent had no heating. The water for washing was often frozen. The cells were small, Spartan, and cold. The food was simple and scarce. Silence reigned for most of the day. 6 hours of communal prayer, manual labor, spiritual study, and always, the constant presence of the same people in a confined space. Teresa, who had been pampered like the little queen of her family, who had grown up in a comfortable home with a loving father who indulged her every whim, suddenly found herself stripped of all privilege. She was just another applicant, the youngest, the one who had to learn everything from scratch, and the learning process was tough. But perhaps the most difficult thing wasn't the material austerity. It was the emotional austerity. Teresa had imagined that in the convent, all the sisters would be saints, that life would be a succession of mystical ecstasies, that she would find there the perfection that the world could not offer. Reality was very different. The Carmelite nuns were holy women, yes, but they were also human, with their virtues and flaws, their good days and bad, their natural likes and dislikes. Teresa, with her profound sensitivity, grasped every nuance of these human dynamics, and it pained her. It especially pained her when her own prioress, Mother Mary of Gonzaga, treated her coldly. Mother Maria Gonzaga was a complex woman, capable of great kindness, but also of harshness. Intelligent, but sometimes arbitrary. And with Teresa, she decided, consciously or unconsciously, to apply a particularly austere method of formation. She rarely spoke a kind word to her. She frequently corrected her in public. She almost never showed her affection or approval. For a young woman raised in abundant love, this coldness was a heavy cross to bear. Teresa suffered every time Mother Maria Gonzaga passed by without a smile, every time she received a curt correction, every time she saw the prioress warm with other sisters, but cold with her. If you know the experience of feeling rejected by someone whose approval you crave, if you have experienced that inexplicable coldness from someone in a position of authority, then you understand something of Teresa's silent suffering. But it was precisely in that suffering that Teresa began to develop her revolutionary spirituality. For instead of becoming bitter, instead of rebelling inwardly, Teresa made a radical decision. She would love Mother Mary Gonzaga with special tenderness precisely because she was difficult. She would seek to please her, not to win her affection, but as a pure act of love for God. She would offer every humiliation like a rose to heaven, and she did it, day after day, with a genuine smile on her face even when her heart was bleeding, with outward joy that masked inner sacrifice, with constant kindness toward those who showed her coldness. This wasn't emotional repression or denial of pain. It was the conscious transformation of suffering into love. It was spiritual alchemy, turning the lead of rejection into the gold of charity. Teresa also had to learn the convent's domestic chores. She, who had been served at home, now served. She washed clothes in the cold wash basin, with icy water that chapped her hands. She worked in the garden, digging in the hard earth. She helped in the kitchen, where sometimes her clumsiness caused minor disasters that she had to clean up without complaint. She sewed the sisters' habits, although she wasn't particularly skilled with a needle. Each of these seemingly insignificant tasks became, in Teresa's hands, an opportunity for love. She would later write, "My only means of proving my love is to scatter flowers, that is, to let no small sacrifice, no glance, no word escape me, to seize the smallest actions and do them out of love. Scattering flowers. This image would become central to her spirituality. The flowers represented small acts of love, seemingly insignificant gestures performed with immense charity. Picking up a pin from the floor, smiling at a difficult sister, giving up the best seat in the refectory, offering help unsolicited, remaining silent when she had the perfect comeback. Each of these small things was a flower scattered at the feet of Jesus, but not all the sisters were difficult. Teresa found constant support in her sister Pauline, now Sister Agnes of Jesus, and in another Carmelite sister, Marie, now Sister Marie of the Sacred Heart, she found a tender companion. Having her biological sisters in the same convent was a comfort, but also a test, for Teresa had to learn not to seek in them the familial affection her heart longed for, but to treat them as any other sister in Christ. There was also one nun who presented Teresa with a particularly demanding challenge. We don't know her exact name, because Teresa never identified her in her writings, but we do know that this sister had mannerisms that deeply irritated Teresa. The way she ate, the little noises she made during prayer, certain personal quirks. Everything about her annoyed Teresa to the point of being almost unbearable. What did Teresa do? She decided to be especially kind to this sister. She smiled at her with particular sweetness. She looked for opportunities to help her. She showed her favoritism in small things, all this without the other sister ever knowing how much effort it took for Teresa. In fact, this nun eventually asked Teresa what it was that attracted her so much, because she noticed that Teresa always seemed to seek her company. Teresa never revealed the truth. This is what Teresa called making others happy. It wasn't hypocrisy. It was heroic charity. It was loving not because it's easy, but because God asks it of us. It was finding Christ in the face most difficult to love. If you've ever had to live with someone who irritates you, someone whose quirks drive you crazy, someone who intentionally or unintentionally makes your life difficult, then you know how heroic what Teresa did day after day really was. Time passed in Carmel with the slowness of raindrops eroding rock. Teresa made her profession of vows on September 8, 1889, the feast of the Nativity of Mary. She was only 16 years old. That day, as was the tradition, Teresa received her crown of flowers and prostrated herself on the choir floor covered with a funeral pall, symbolizing her death to the world. Then she rose, no longer as Teresa Martin, but as Sister Teresa of the Child Jesus and of the Holy Face. That name was no accident. Of the Child Jesus expressed her devotion to spiritual childhood, to becoming small like a child before God. Of the Holy Face was her union with the suffering Christ, the disfigured face of the Messiah in his passion. Teresa united two mysteries in her name, the trusting littleness of the child and the redemptive suffering of the cross. This would be her entire spirituality, summarized in one name. The days passed, seemingly monotonous but intense in their depth. Teresa prayed the required 6 hours a day, and often much more. She experienced no visible mystical ecstasies or spectacular raptures. Her prayer was mostly dry, full of distractions, seemingly fruitless. But she persevered, offering even that dryness like another rose to Jesus. At the Carmelite convent, Teresa also had access to a small spiritual library. She read St. John of the Cross, whose doctrine of the dark night of the soul resonated deeply within her. She read the Gospels until she knew them almost by heart. She especially loved the Gospel of John and the letters of Paul. But above all, Teresa developed a personal and intimate relationship with Jesus that did not require elaborate words or complex theological concepts. For Teresa, Jesus was her friend, her brother, her husband, her everything. She spoke to him with the ease of someone speaking to a dearly loved one. She confided in him her sorrows and joys, her small triumphs and her failures. She offered him every moment of the day as a gift, and although she didn't always feel his presence, she trusted in his love as a child trusts in their father, even when they can't see him. This trust would become the heart of her spirituality. but she had not yet attained complete clarity about her little way. That would come later, like a gradual dawn slowly illuminating the landscape. For now, Teresa lived in daily fidelity, in holy monotony, in hidden humility. And in that hidden smallness, God was preparing her. He was polishing her like a diamond. He was emptying her of herself to fill her with himself. He was preparing her to be a teacher to millions without her even knowing it. Because God's ways are like that, mysterious, slow, silent, but always perfect. Teresa did not know that her ordinary life, her silent faithfulness, her love hidden in small things, would become a treasure for the universal church. She did not seek it. She did not imagine it. She simply lived each day with love, scattering her flowers, being small before the immense God who had made himself small out of love for her. And that, precisely that, was all that God needed from her. It was a gradual discovery, like dawn that doesn't explode but slowly seeps in until it floods the entire sky with light. Teresa didn't wake up one morning with her little path fully formed in her mind. Rather, it was a process of revelation that took years, built on concrete experiences, painful frustrations, and brutal honesty with herself. The starting point was a crisis of realism. Teresa read the lives of the saints with her characteristic fervor, but instead of inspiring her, they began to discourage her. The saints of the past had done amazing things: heroic martyrdoms, extreme penances, mass conversions, spectacular miracles. They founded religious orders, reformed the church, converted entire nations. They were spiritual giants walking the earth. And Teresa looked at herself, a young nun of frail health, shut away in a small convent in a small French town, doing nothing extraordinary, unable to do anything extraordinary. She was too weak for long fasts, too sensitive for extreme disciplines, too small, in every sense, for the feats of the saints she read about. This awareness of her own insignificance could have plunged her into despair. Many souls would have grown bitter, asking, "Why try if I can never be great?" But Teresa, by the grace of God and her fundamental honesty, took a different path. Instead of pretending to be what she was not, she chose to fully embrace what she was: small, weak, ordinary. But here's the revolutionary part. Teresa didn't accept her insignificance with bitter resignation, but with hopeful trust, because she understood something that would change everything, that her insignificance wasn't an obstacle to God's love, but the perfect gateway, that God didn't love her despite her weakness, but precisely in her, through her, because of her. Teresa would later write, "I have always desired to be a saint, but alas, I have always found, when I have compared myself to the saints, that between them and me there is the same difference as between a mountain whose summit is lost in the heavens and the dark grain of sand trampled under the feet of passers-by." Instead of becoming discouraged, I said to myself, the good God cannot inspire unrealizable desires. Therefore I can, despite my littleness, aspire to holiness. Notice the shift in his thinking. God doesn't inspire unrealistic desires. If God had placed the desire for holiness in his heart, then there had to be a path to it. But not the path of giants, not the mountain path. There had to be another path, a hidden path, a path for the little one. And then she discovered the biblical passage that would illuminate everything. "If anyone is very small, let him come to me." Proverbs 9:4. And another, "As a mother comforts her child, so I will comfort you." Isaiah 66:13. Teresa began to understand that she could be a saint not by doing great things, but by letting herself be led by God as a child is led by its mother. This is where the elevator metaphor originates. Teresa wondered, if there are spiritual staircases that the saints climb with heroic effort, wouldn't there also be something like an elevator for the little ones who can't climb on their own? And she found the answer in Scripture itself. The arms of Jesus are that elevator. We don't need to climb the mountain of holiness alone. Jesus will lift us up if we trust in him. Teresa wrote, The elevator that must lift me to heaven is your arms, O Jesus. For that, I do not need to grow. On the contrary, it is necessary that I remain small, that I become smaller and smaller. Do you grasp the revolution here? Not to grow, but to become smaller. Not to become strong, but to remain weak. Not to achieve spiritual autonomy, but to trust more and more like a baby trusts its mother. It was a complete reversal of conventional spiritual logic. If you feel overwhelmed by spiritual expectations, if you've tried to be a great saint and always failed, if you compare yourself to others and feel you never measure up, then you need to listen to what Teresa discovered. God isn't asking you to be great. He's asking you to be small. And in that conscious, trusting smallness, He will do great things. Teresa called this her little way, her little path of spiritual childhood. It wasn't a complicated method. It wasn't a sophisticated technique. It was simply this: recognizing your own smallness, trusting in God's infinite love, and doing the small things of each day with immense love. For Teresa, spiritual childhood did not mean childishness or immaturity. It meant the child's absolute trust in his Father. The small child does not worry about tomorrow because he knows that Dad will take care of him. He is not anxious about his weaknesses because he knows that Mum will look after him. He does not compare himself to adults because he joyfully accepts being a child. This is how the soul should be before God, trusting like a child who abandons himself into his Father's arms without worrying about how he will reach his destination. The child does not climb the mountain. The Father carries him to the summit. The child only needs to remain in his arms, trusting, calm, secure in his love. But be careful. This littleness is not passivity. Teresa never promoted spiritual laziness or the excuse of, "I am too weak to try." Her littleness was active, ardent, and devoted. She did everything she could, with all her love, without worrying about whether it was enough, knowing that God would supply what was lacking. She wrote, "Jesus is pleased to show me the only path that leads to this divine furnace. That path is the abandonment of the little child who falls asleep without fear in the arms of his Father." Sleep without fear. What a beautiful image. What a profound invitation for those who live in constant anxiety, for those who always worry about whether they are doing enough, whether God is pleased, whether their life has value. Teresa says, sleep in peace. Trust. You are loved not for what you do, but for who you are. A son, a daughter. Small, yes, but infinitely precious. Teresa also discovered that smallness included accepting one's own imperfections without despairing, not in the sense of resigning oneself to them or not fighting against them, but in the sense of not losing one's peace when we fall. The child learning to walk falls constantly, but he doesn't stay on the ground distressed. He gets up and continues because he knows that Dad is there to help him up if necessary. That's how we should be with our spiritual falls, Teresa said. We fall, yes, because we are weak, but we don't despair. We reach out to Jesus, we trust in His mercy, and we carry on, without anguish, without paralyzing guilt, with the simple trust of a child who knows that even if he falls 1,000 times, Dad will always pick him up. Teresa wrote to a novice, "Never be discouraged. If you make a mistake, get up immediately, saying to yourself, 'Little Thérèse doesn't expect anything from her little Thérèse. She isn't surprised to find weakness in her, but she expects everything from her God, from her Jesus.'" This attitude was liberating. It shifted the focus from our effort, which will always be insufficient, to God's love, which is always more than enough. It didn't eliminate effort. On the contrary, it intensified it because it was no longer tainted by anxiety about the outcome. We do our best not to earn God's love, but because we are already loved. And that love frees us to love without fear of failure. Teresa also connected her little way with God's merciful. In her time, many Catholics lived in terror of divine judgment, obsessed with the possibility of hell, trying to earn heaven through good works. Teresa saw this as a tragic caricature of God. For her, God was not a stern judge waiting for the slightest mistake to condemn, but a merciful Father who delights in forgiving. She wrote, "His infinite mercy has been given to me, and through it I contemplate and adore the other divine perfections. Then all seem radiant with love to me, even justice, perhaps more than any other perfection, seems clothed in love." Do you grasp the depth of this? Even God's justice is love. It is not vengeance in disguise, but love that corrects, purifies, and uplifts. And mercy is not divine weakness, but the highest expression of his love. God does not forgive grudgingly. He delights in forgiving. He does not accept us despite our sins. He embraces us in the midst of them and transforms us. If you find it hard to believe that God loves you, if you picture God as a stern judge rather than a tender father, if you live in constant fear of not being good enough, Teresa has a message for you. You're seeing God the wrong way. God is not as you fear. He is infinitely kinder, more merciful, and more tender than you can imagine. The little way, then, was not just a spiritual method. It was a revelation of God's heart. It was seeing God not as the unattainable giant, but as the approachable Father, not as the implacable judge, but as the passionate lover, not as the one who demands perfection, but as the one who embraces smallness. And this revelation transformed everything. Prayer was no longer a burdensome duty, but a resting place in the arms of the Beloved. Mortification was no longer self-imposed punishment, but an offering of love. Daily tasks were no longer distractions from true spirituality, but the very ground where holiness is cultivated. Teresa had discovered that heaven is not reserved for spiritual supermen, but for trusting children. That holiness does not require extraordinary talents, but an ordinary heart filled with extraordinary love. That the path to God does not climb a steep mountain, but descends into true humility. And the most beautiful thing is that this path is open to everyone, absolutely everyone. No matter how weak, how sinful, how ordinary you are, the little way awaits you. Jesus' arms are open. You only need to take one step, acknowledge your smallness, and trust in his infinite love. Teresa summed it up in a phrase that would become the heart of her spirituality. My vocation is love, not great works, not spectacular feats, only love. Love in the small things, love in the ordinary, constant, trusting, childlike love. And that love, Teresa discovered, can change the world. It can save souls. It can transform the church. Because love is never small, even when expressed in tiny gestures. Love is always immense because it participates in the infinite love of God. This was the secret Teresa had discovered. This was the treasure she had found hidden in the field of her smallness. And now, in her few remaining years, she would try to live it fully and share it with anyone who would listen. The little way was born, and with it, a new way of understanding, an accessible, liberating way, full of trust and love. A perfect way for humble souls in a world that demands greatness. Your way, my way, our way to heaven. Discovering the path was one thing, living it day after day was quite another. Because spiritual theory always sounds beautiful when we contemplate it from afar, but living it in the heat of the day, in the cold of winter, in the monotony of the everyday, amidst difficult people and frustrating situations, that requires more than beautiful ideas. It requires real love. And Teresa loved with true love. Not with romantic feelings or heightened emotions, but with the unwavering will to seek the good of others without expecting anything in return. Her way wasn't theory. It was concrete practice, moment by moment, person by person, situation by situation. Let's look at some concrete examples of how Teresa lived her little path, because in these seemingly insignificant details lies the hidden greatness of her holiness. There was an elderly sister in the convent who was particularly difficult to deal with. She had brusque manners, was critical, and seemed especially antipathetic toward Teresa. This nun, Sister St. Peter, had difficulty walking and needed help every night to get to the refectory after prayer. No one wanted to help Sister San Pedro because she was ungrateful and unpleasant. She scolded anyone who tried to help her, was never satisfied with how she was assisted, and generally made the simple task of accompanying her an unpleasant experience. Naturally, the sisters avoided this responsibility. Teresa volunteered to do it. Every night, after evening prayer, Teresa would go to find Sister Peter. She would help her up from her place in the choir, with infinite patience and gentleness. Then the slow process of walking to the refectory would begin. Sister San Pedro leaned on Teresa, but she also complained constantly. "You're going too fast. You're going too slow. You're going to make me fall. You're not holding me right." And Teresa, instead of getting irritated, smiled and adjusted her pace, trying to make the experience as comfortable as possible for the elderly nun. But Teresa didn't stop there. Once they arrived at the refectory, Teresa would show Sister St. Peter to her place, straighten her napkin, cut her bread, and serve her food. She did all this with such tenderness that Sister St. Peter, despite her gruff nature, became deeply attached to Teresa. Although she never explicitly said so, the elderly nun found in Teresa the patient love that her difficult temperament had kept from others. Why did Teresa do all this? Because she saw Jesus in Sister St. Peter, not the glorious and radiant Jesus, but the poor, aged, and difficult-to-love Jesus. And every small service she performed for this complicated sister was a flower thrown at the feet of the Saviour. Teresa wrote, "The more difficult something is for me to do, the happier I feel doing it. If you've ever wondered how to love someone difficult in your life, how to serve someone ungrateful, how to remain gentle with someone who treats you harshly, Teresa's answer is simple but not easy. See Jesus in that person. Serve Jesus in them. Love Jesus through them. Not because the person deserves it, none of us do, but because Jesus mysteriously dwells in every human being, especially those who are most difficult to love." Another concrete example. There was a sister in the convent who had a habit of making certain noises during meditation. Perhaps it was the sound of her breathing, or the rustling of her rosary, or some nervous tic. Whatever it was, Teresa found it incredibly irritating. So irritating, in fact, that she was constantly tempted to turn away and ask for silence, or to change places to avoid having to endure it. But Teresa saw in this irritation an opportunity for love. She decided not only to endure the noise, but to offer it to God as a prayer. Instead of fighting the annoyance, she accepted it and transformed it. She wrote, "I tried to find pleasure in that little out-of-tune music, and my whole prayer consisted in offering it to Jesus. Transforming annoyance into music offered to God, turning irritation into prayer. This is spiritual alchemy. This is the little way in action, not denying the reality that something bothers us, but consciously and willingly transforming that annoyance into an act of love." We all have our irritating noises in life. The co-worker who talks too loudly, the neighbor who plays music late at night, the family member with their exasperating quirks. Teresa teaches us that we can choose how to respond. We can let them embitter us, or we can transform them into offerings of love. The choice, surprisingly, is ours. There was also a sister in the convent toward whom Teresa felt a natural antipathy. There was no specific reason. Simply something in this nun's character clashed with Teresa. It was one of those spontaneous antipathies that sometimes arise between people without either of them being truly at fault. Teresa recognized this antipathy in her heart and decided to do the exact opposite of what her nature urged. She actively sought the other sister's company. She smiled at her with particular sweetness. She offered her small favors. She showed her genuine affection. All this without the other nun ever knowing what it cost Teresa. The result was beautiful and paradoxical. The sister eventually asked Teresa what it was about her that attracted her so much, because she noticed that Teresa always sought her company and seemed especially happy by her side. Teresa never revealed the truth. She simply continued to love her with a love born not of feeling, but of will. And here's something crucial to understand about Teresa's little path. True love doesn't depend on how we feel. Feelings come and go like ocean waves. Today, you feel affection. Tomorrow, indifference. The day after, antipathy. But real love, the love Teresa practiced, is a constant decision to seek the good of the other person, regardless of our own feelings. If you wait to feel love before you love, you will never truly love. Teresa teaches us to love first, to act with love first, and to trust that God will take care of the feelings. Or perhaps the feelings will never come. It doesn't matter. Authentic love doesn't need them. Teresa also practiced small mortifications that no one noticed. In the refectory, if the food was particularly bad or cold, she ate it without complaining or making any gestures that revealed her displeasure. If she was served the worst, she accepted it with the same joy as if it were the best. If there was something she particularly liked, she would refrain from eating it, leaving it for others. These small renunciations were not spectacular. No one saw them. No one applauded them. There were no witnesses to her sacrifice. But for Teresa, each one was a precious flower offered to Jesus. Each one was an act of pure love, untainted by vanity or a desire for recognition. How many opportunities do we have each day for these small voluntary acts of self-denial? Giving up the best seat, not correcting someone who says something wrong about us, not defending ourselves when we're misunderstood, smiling when we'd rather be silent, helping when we're tired, listening when we want to talk. These are all flowers we can offer at the feet of Jesus. In the convent's laundry room, where the sisters washed clothes in ice-cold water during the winter, one nun had a habit of splashing dirty water on Teresa as she washed. Every week it was the same. Teresa would finish her day's laundry with her habit stained by the dirty water splashed on her by the sister next to her. The natural reaction would have been to ask her to be more careful, or to change places, or at least to show annoyance. Teresa did none of that. She accepted the splashes with inner peace, offering them up as small acts of loving penance. The sister who splashed her never knew she was doing it, and Teresa never told her. She simply offered it up, week after week, like one more of her hidden flowers. Do you see the pattern? Teresa's little way wasn't about grand heroic gestures, but about small, loving acts of acceptance. It was a spirituality of the present moment, of the concrete situation, of the person in front of you right now. Not tomorrow, not in ideal circumstances, but now, here, with this person, in this imperfect situation. Teresa also developed what she called the hidden smile. There were days when she felt sad, ill, and discouraged. But instead of showing her suffering, she smiled. It wasn't hypocrisy, it was charity. She didn't want her sisters to bear her sadness. She didn't want to pollute the convent atmosphere with her bad mood. She wrote, "When I'm sad, when things turn bitter, I try to smile. At first, I didn't always manage it, but now it's become a habit that comes easily." This hidden smile was another of her flowers, a rose offered in the desert of her difficult feelings. But be warned, Teresa never promoted toxic emotional repression or the denial of real pain. When necessary, she spoke to her superiors about her struggles. When she was ill, she communicated it. The hidden smile wasn't a denial of her humanity, but a choice not to impose her suffering on others. It's a subtle but crucial distinction. Teresa also practiced what she called small renunciations of one's own will. For example, if she was writing something and someone interrupted her, she would immediately stop what she was doing to attend to the person, not with suppressed annoyance, not with sighs or body language that conveyed discomfort, but with genuine joy at being able to help. If she preferred to do one task but was assigned another, she accepted without showing any preference. If she was asked to change places in the choir, she did so without revealing that she had another favorite. All these small sacrifices tormented her willpower, that ego that always wants to get its way, that gets irritated when things don't go as planned. How many times a day are our plans interrupted? How often do things not go as we expected? How often does someone ask us for something just when we're busy with something else? Teresa teaches us to see all these interruptions as divine invitations. God speaks in what interrupts our plans as much as in the plans themselves. Teresa had a beautiful image for all of this. She said that her life was like scattering rose petals. Every small act of love, every small sacrifice, every small smile, every small act of service was a petal gently falling at the feet of Jesus. One by one, the petals don't seem like much. But at the end of the day, at the end of life, they form a path of flowers leading straight to the heart of God. I will scatter flowers, Teresa wrote. That is to say, I will not let any small sacrifice, any glance, any word slip by. I will take advantage of every tiny action and do them out of love. If you feel overwhelmed by great spiritual expectations, if you think you need to do important things to please God, if you compare yourself to others who seem holier or more capable, Teresa invites you to change your perspective. Don't look at the mountains you cannot climb. Look at the petal you can offer now, the smile you can give now, the patience you can practice now, the small service you can do now, and do it out of love, not out of obligation, not out of fear, not to earn your place in heaven or impress anyone. Do it because you love, because you are loved, because love begs to be shared. That is the secret. That is the way. That is the path that is open to everyone, absolutely everyone, without exception. Teresa lived these years of hidden fidelity without knowing that she was writing a spiritual treatise with her very life. She didn't know that her small gestures of love would be studied by millions. She couldn't imagine that her simple way of loving would transform Catholic spirituality. She only knew that she loved, that each day she could love a little more, that every moment was an opportunity to offer another flower. And in that constant littleness, in that hidden fidelity, in that ordinary but intense love, Teresa was reaching the heights of holiness by the path that God had designed especially for her, the little way of the little ones. But the greatest trials were yet to come. The desert was about to become even more barren. Night was about to fall upon his soul. And in that darkness, the little path would be tested to its limits. There was a paradox in Teresa's life that she herself acknowledged with disconcerting honesty. While she taught others about childlike trust in God, while she wrote about the tender love of the Heavenly Father, while her spirituality radiated light and consolation, her own soul walked in ever denser darkness. This was his greatest trial, his darkest night. And it began precisely when his life seemed most full of light. It was Holy Thursday, 1896. Teresa was 23 years old. That night, after matins, when she returned to her cell, she felt something warm on her lips. She lit her lamp and saw blood. A lot of blood. She had coughed up blood. In the 19th century, this meant one thing: tuberculosis. And tuberculosis, at that time, was a death sentence. Teresa wasn't frightened. In fact, she felt a strange joy. She would later write, "I felt such great joy that I was convinced that my Jesus, on the anniversary of his death, was making me hear his first call." She believed that she would soon be with Jesus in heaven. Soon her exile would end. Soon she would see face to face the one she loved so much. But something else happened that night, something far more terrible than physical tuberculosis. Teresa entered what Saint John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul, a spiritual trial so profound that it would make the physical suffering of her illness seem almost insignificant in comparison. Teresa lost all tangible consolation in her faith. Heaven, which had once seemed so real, so near, so tangible, suddenly seemed to vanish like a dream. The certainty of eternal life, which had been the foundation of her entire existence, began to waver. An inner voice, which she knew was not from God, but which she could not silence, began to whisper to her constantly, "It's all a lie. There is no heaven. There is no God. There is nothing after death but eternal emptiness." To grasp the magnitude of this ordeal, you need to understand that Teresa had built her entire life on the certainty of heaven. All her sacrifice, all her renunciation, all her hidden love, everything had meaning because she lived for heaven, through heaven, toward heaven. Heaven was her true homeland. This life was merely a temporary exile before she reached home. And now, suddenly, that certainty had evaporated. Teresa found herself sitting at what she called the table of sinners, those who don't believe, who doubt, who live as if there were nothing beyond this life. Faith, which had once been as natural as breathing, became a constant struggle against thoughts of disbelief. She wrote with heartbreaking honesty, "It seems to me that the darkness, borrowing the voice of sinners, mockingly tells me, 'You dream of light, of a homeland embalmed with the sweetest perfumes. You dream of the eternal possession of the Creator of all these wonders. You believe you will one day emerge from the darkness that surrounds you. Go on, rejoice in the death that will give you, not what you expect, but an even deeper night, the night of nothingness.'" Imagine what this meant for Teresa. Her entire spiritual life, her whole path, all her love, suddenly seemed built on sand. What if it was all an illusion? What if God wasn't waiting for her? What if her life of sacrifice had been in vain? If you have ever experienced doubts of faith, if you have gone through periods when God seemed completely absent, if you have struggled with thoughts that question everything you believed, then you know something of Teresa's suffering. But multiply that 1,000-fold, because for someone like her, whose entire life was centered on God, losing the sense of His presence was like losing the very air she breathed. And the worst part is that this night didn't last days or weeks. It lasted 18 months. From that Easter of 1896 until her death in September 1897, Teresa lived in this constant spiritual darkness. Day after day, night after night, temptation against the faith besieged her relentlessly. But here's what's extraordinary. What makes Teresa a master even in her deepest suffering? She never stopped loving. She never stopped trusting. Even though she didn't feel God, even though she didn't see heaven, even though all tangible consolation had vanished, she chose to believe. She chose to love. She chose to trust. Teresa called this trial her tunnel. She wrote, "I run to my Jesus. I tell him that I am ready to shed my blood to the last drop to testify that there is a heaven." Note the paradox. She was willing to die for the existence of a heaven that she could no longer feel, that no longer seemed real to her in her sensory experience. This is pure faith. Faith stripped of all consolation. Faith based not on feelings but on a radical decision to trust despite everything. It is the faith of the little way taken to its most heroic expression, trusting like a child even when the father seems absent. Teresa developed a beautiful practice during this dark night. Whenever a thought of unbelief assailed her, she made a small act of faith, not with grand words, but simply and repeatedly. "I believe, I trust, I love." It was like planting a flag in enemy territory, again and again, claiming her soul for God despite the darkness. She also wrote what she called her creed. It wasn't the church's creed, but a personal expression of faith in the midst of darkness. She wrote it with her own blood, literally. Because tuberculosis caused her to cough up blood constantly, she used that blood to write the words of her faith. "I believe in God the Father. I believe in the Son. I believe in the Holy Spirit." Each word was an act of faith against the darkness. If you're going through your own dark night, if God seems silent, if your prayers seem to bounce off the ceiling, if you've lost all sense of faith, but something inside you refuses to give up, Teresa understands. She walked that path before you, and she tells you, keep going. Even if you feel nothing, even if it seems like you're praying into the void, even if the darkness is total, keep loving, keep trusting, keep believing, because true faith isn't feeling that God is near. It's trusting that He is near even when everything points to the contrary. True trust isn't feeling secure. It's choosing God's security when everything inside you screams insecurity. True love isn't feeling warm affection. It's deciding to love when your heart is cold. Teresa also came to a profound understanding during this ordeal, that her suffering had redemptive value. If she was seated at the table of sinners, of those who did not believe, it was to share in their pain. She could offer her dark night of the soul for all those who live without faith, so that they might find the light that she, for the time being, could not see. He wrote, "Jesus has given me the comfort of thinking that perhaps many poor unbelievers are sitting at my table, that he allows my soul to be invaded by the thickest darkness in order to illuminate those who have no faith. His suffering was not in vain. It became a bridge of redemption for others." This understanding transformed her trial. It was no longer just her personal cross, but a gift she could offer for the salvation of others. Theresa's dark night became a light for souls lost in darkness. Her temporary loss of the sense of God became a path for others to find God. If your suffering seems pointless, if your struggle seems futile, if your night seems barren, Theresa invites you to offer it up. Offer it up for someone who suffers more than you. Offer it up for those who have completely lost their faith. Offer it up for those on the verge of despair. Your pain is not in vain. In the mystery of the communion of saints, your offered suffering can be a grace for another. Theresa also discovered that the dark night purified her love. While she had tangible consolations, there was always the subtle danger of loving God for what she felt in His presence. Now, feeling nothing, she loved God for God's sake. Her love had been purified of all self-interest, even the interest in feeling spiritually good. This is mature love. Love that doesn't need immediate reward. Love that loves even when it receives nothing in return, not even the satisfaction of feeling that it loves well. It is the purest, most selfless love, most like God's love for us. Theresa wrote in one of her last poems, "To live by love is to live your life, not to pitch a tent on Mount Tabor. It is to climb Calvary with you, to look upon the cross as a treasure." She had understood that true love includes the cross. It does not seek only the light of Tabor, but accepts the darkness of Golgotha. And the extraordinary thing is that, throughout this entire dark night, no one in the convent noticed. Theresa continued smiling, continued serving, continued seemingly being herself. No one knew that inside she was waging a spiritual battle of epic proportion. She continued scattering her flowers as always, though now she did so in complete darkness. This is the hidden heroism of the little path. It is not spectacular. It has no witnesses. It receives no applause. But it is real, profound, and costly. It is the holiness lived in the secret of the heart, known only to God. Theresa maintained her faith throughout the night, not through her own strength. She repeated it constantly. It was purely God's grace. She only contributed the cooperation, the openness, the willingness to move forward step by step. But the strength was from God. It always is from God. If you're wondering how you'll get through your own trial, how you'll find the strength to keep going when everything inside you wants to give up, the answer is the same. It's not your strength. It's God's. You just need to take one more step. Just one. And then another. And another. One moment at a time. 1 hour at a time. 1 day at a time. Theresa did it this way. She didn't think about the months of darkness that lay ahead. She lived only in the present moment. Now was her only concern. Now she could love. Now she could trust. Now she could believe. And by linking all those nows, she crossed her tunnel to the end. Theresa's dark night teaches us something crucial. Faith is not the absence of doubt. Trust is not the absence of fear. Love is not the absence of suffering. True faith, trust, and love are choosing to believe, trust, and love precisely when doubt, fear, and suffering are present. And in the end, though Theresa didn't know it then, her dark night would become one of her greatest gifts to the Church. Because millions of people going through their own dark nights find in Theresa a companion who understands, a saint who didn't live in constant ecstasy, but struggled, doubted, suffered, and yet continued to love. You are holier when you love without feeling anything, than when you love overwhelmed by consolations. Your faith is purer when you believe against all sensible evidence than when you believe wrapped in comforting certainties. Your trust is stronger when you choose to trust in the darkness than when you trust in the light. Teresa teaches us that the little way doesn't avoid the dark night. On the contrary, sometimes it leads us directly through it. But never alone. Jesus walks beside us, invisible but real. And on the other side of the night, though we cannot yet see it, lies the eternal dawn. Tuberculosis was unforgiving. As 1896 turned into 1897, Teresa's condition steadily worsened, but so gradually, so subtly, that at first no one in the convent was overly alarmed. Teresa continued to fulfill her duties, continued to smile, continued to be herself. Only now she coughed more frequently. She tired more easily. She grew more noticeably pale. The Mother Superior, Mother Maria de Gonzaga, didn't take Teresa's illness very seriously at first. Perhaps because Teresa didn't complain. Perhaps because tuberculosis was so common at that time that it had become almost normalized. Or perhaps because she simply didn't want to face the reality that she was losing another one of her nuns. Teresa continued with her normal routine as much as she could. She attended all the community prayers. She worked in the laundry despite the cold, which worsened her condition. She fulfilled her responsibilities in the kitchen and the garden. Only when she could no longer physically stand did she allow herself to be taken to the infirmary. But even in illness, Teresa practiced her little way. Every painful cough was a flower. Every fever that burned within her was a rose. Every difficulty breathing was an act of love offered to Jesus. Physical suffering added to her spiritual suffering, creating a cross of dimensions that only she fully understood. Teresa wrote during these months, "I never would have believed that one could suffer so much. I can only explain it by the burning desire I have to save souls." Her body was crumbling, her soul was walking in darkness, but her love continued to burn, stronger than ever. The nights were especially terrible. The tuberculosis caused nighttime fevers that drenched her in sweat. Her cough shook her violently, leaving her breathless and coughing up blood. The pain in her lungs was like knives stabbing her with every breath. And above all this, the spiritual darkness that gave her no respite. Teresa spent those nights alone in her freezing cell, clinging to her naked faith, offering every moment of agony for the conversion of sinners. She didn't ask for the suffering to end. She asked for the strength to endure it with love. There is a crucial difference here. If you are suffering physically or emotionally, if the nights are long and the pain constant, if you wonder how much more you can endure, Teresa doesn't tell you that suffering is easy. She doesn't give you simplistic answers or ask you to pretend it doesn't hurt. Suffering is real, it's terrible, it is what it is. But Teresa shows you that even suffering can be transformed into love. You don't have to seek out suffering. But when it comes, when it's inevitable, when there's no escape, you can choose how to receive it. You can let it embitter you, or you can use it as an offering. The choice, mysteriously, is yours. In April 1897, Teresa's condition worsened dramatically. She could no longer attend community prayers. She was permanently transferred to the infirmary. The sisters began to realize they were losing Teresa. Some visited her and were horrified to see how much she had changed. The radiant young woman had become a gaunt figure, consumed by illness, but her eyes still shone. Her smile, though fainter, remained genuine, and her words, now difficult to utter for lack of air, were still full of faith and love. The sisters who visited her left the infirmary uplifted, not depressed. Teresa's presence, even in her agony, remained a light. Teresa now spent her days reclining in her narrow bed, gazing out the window at the convent garden. She saw the flowers she loved so much, the trees she had known for years, the sky she would soon leave behind, and she continued to offer it all up. Her sister Pauline, Sister Agnes of Jesus, visited frequently and wrote down Teresa's words. These conversations would later be published as Last Conversations. In them, Teresa revealed with stark honesty her suffering, but also her profound peace. "I don't regret having given myself to love," Teresa would say. And then, with a surprising honesty, "However, if I could choose, I would prefer not to suffer." Teresa didn't romanticize pain. She didn't pretend to enjoy suffering. She was painfully human in her desire for the suffering to end. But she would immediately add, "However, if Jesus wants me to suffer, I am happy to suffer." Therein lies the secret, not seeking suffering for its own sake, but accepting it when God permits it, trusting that even the most excruciating pain can have a purpose in the divine plan. Doctors came occasionally, but there wasn't much they could do. Tuberculosis was incurable at that time. They could only slightly alleviate the symptoms, but the outcome was inevitable. Teresa knew it. Everyone knew it. It was only a matter of time. During these final months, Teresa also experienced a terrible physical thirst. The constant fever, the difficulty drinking due to the inflammation in her throat, all contributed to a thirst that tormented her constantly. And Teresa connected this thirst with the thirst of Jesus on the cross. "I thirst." She offered her thirst along with Christ's for the salvation of souls. There were moments of temptation to despair, illness, spiritual darkness, constant pain, all combined to create a perfect storm that threatened to break her. Teresa later admitted, "If I hadn't had faith, I would have taken my own life without a moment's hesitation." This confession is important. Teresa wasn't a superhero immune to suffering or temptation. She was human, deeply human. And in her humanity, she fought as any of us would. The difference is that she chose to keep trusting, step by step, moment by moment, even when trusting was the hardest thing in the world. As summer wore on, Teresa grew weaker. She could no longer write. She could barely speak. Every breath was a struggle. And yet, when the sisters came to visit her, she tried to smile, tried to appear peaceful, tried to remain until the very end, that small flower that spread its fragrance even as it withered. "I have never sought anything but the truth," Teresa said in her final weeks. And that truth she had sought all her life was simple yet infinite, that God is love, that we are loved infinitely, that our smallness is not an obstacle, but a gateway to that love. September 30th, 1897, would be Teresa's last day on this earth. That day dawned with Teresa suffering terribly. The final agony had begun. The sisters gathered around her bed, praying, keeping her company. Teresa struggled for every breath. The pain was unbearable. "I can't take it anymore," she whispered. "My God, have mercy on me." It wasn't quiet resignation. It was real agony, genuine suffering until the very last moment. Teresa shows us that holiness doesn't eliminate human pain. It goes through it. It embraces it. It transforms it. Finally, around 7 in the evening, Teresa looked up at something only she could see. Her eyes lit up with a love and joy that completely transformed her gaunt face. And she whispered her last words, "My God, I love you." Then he closed his eyes and entered eternal sleep. Teresa Martin, Sister Teresa of the Child Jesus and of the Holy Face, had died at the age of 24 years, 9 months, and 28 days. She died as she had lived her last years, in spiritual darkness, in physical suffering, but with constant love. Until her last breath, she chose to love. The Carmelite nuns mourned her death, of course. They loved her, but none of them imagined what would come next. None of them suspected that this young nun, who had lived so hidden away, who had never done anything spectacular, who had died in a small convent in a small town, was about to conquer the world. Because Teresa had made a promise before she died, a promise that seemed impossible, coming from someone so small, so hidden, so ordinary. But it was a promise she would keep beyond all imagination. "I will spend my heaven doing good on earth. I will make a shower of roses fall." Those were Teresa's words shortly before she died. Her sisters listened to them with tenderness, but perhaps with a touch of skepticism. How could this unknown young nun do any good on earth after death? What roses could someone who had never left her small convent possibly make fall? The answer began to reveal itself almost immediately after his death. Teresa had left behind a manuscript. Actually, 3 manuscripts that together formed what would become known as Story of a Soul. She had written them out of obedience to her superiors, not with the intention of publishing them. They were simply memoirs of her life, reflections on her spiritual journey, the story of her little flower. Mother Agnes of Jesus, her sister Pauline, decided to publish these writings, as was the custom when a Carmelite nun died. A few copies were printed to send to other Carmelite convents. No one expected much. They were the memoirs of a young, unknown nun who had done nothing extraordinary. But when people began reading Story of a Soul, something extraordinary happened. The book touched hearts in an inexplicable way. Teresa's simplicity, her honesty, her message of trust and small love resonated in souls overwhelmed by impossible spiritual expectations. People wrote to the Carmelite monastery in Lisieux, "This book has changed my life. I finally understand that I can be a saint. I finally see a path I can follow." The letters arrived by the dozens, then by the hundreds, then by the thousands, from France, from Belgium, from Italy, from Spain, from all over the Catholic world. And with the letters came testimonies of favors received. People who had prayed to Teresa asking for her intercession reported healings, conversions, extraordinary graces. The roses that Teresa had promised began to fall, and they fell in abundance. A missionary priest in Africa wrote that he had read Teresa's book and finally understood the value of small sacrifices in missionary life. A mother in America reported that Teresa's example had taught her to find God in everyday household chores. A soldier in the trenches of World War I carried Teresa's book in his knapsack and read it every night before going to sleep. The message of the little way spread like wildfire, because it was a message the world desperately needed. In an age of rapid industrialization, of massive cities where the individual felt lost, of ever greater and more overwhelming expectations, Teresa offered an alternative: the greatness of small things, the power of the ordinary, holiness accessible to all. In 1923, just 26 years after her death, Teresa was beatified by Pope Pius V. In 1925, she was canonized. The speed of her canonization was almost unprecedented. The miracles attributed to her intercession numbered in the thousand. The conversions inspired by her example were countless. The impact of her short life was immeasurably great. Pope Pius V, at her canonization ceremony, called her the star of my pontificate. And it was no exaggeration. In a world torn apart by wars, economic crises, and existential angst, Teresa offered hope. A simple, yet profound hope, that small acts of love can change the world. But the surprises didn't end there. In 1927, Teresa was declared patron saint of the missions, along with Saint Francis Xavier. This seemed paradoxical. Teresa had never left her convent, never preached to pagans, and never founded missions. How could she be the patron saint of missionaries? The answer lay in what she herself had discovered: that contemplative prayer is missionary, that hidden love sustains visible evangelization, that small flowers scattered in a cloistered convent can bloom in distant lands. Teresa, from her narrow cell, had evangelized the whole world through her prayer and her love, and there was more. In 1997, exactly 100 years after her death, Pope John Paul II declared Teresa a doctor of the Church. There had only been 33 doctors of the Church in its entire history, teachers whose teachings had illuminated the path of faith for generations. And now Teresa, the little flower, the unknown nun who had died at the age of 24, joined that select group. A young woman without formal theological training, scholarly books, or philosophical treatises, was declared a teacher of the universal faith. Why? Because she had rediscovered the heart of the gospel, that God is Father, that we are His beloved children, and that the path to Him is childlike trust and simple love. John Paul II said in his proclamation, Teresa of the Child Jesus and of the Holy Face is the youngest of the doctors of the Church, but her ardent spiritual journey manifests such maturity, and the intuitions of faith expressed in her writings are so vast and profound that they deserve her a place among the great masters of the Spirit. Teresa's impact on the 20th century was immense. She influenced saints like Edith Stein, who discovered her religious vocation reading Story of a Soul. She inspired Blessed Charles de Foucauld in his spirituality of the universal brother. She shaped how generations of Catholics understood holiness. But her influence extended beyond Catholicism. People from other Christian traditions, even from other religions, found something universal in Teresa: the wisdom of small things, the value of the ordinary, the depth of simplicity. In a world obsessed with success, fame, and power, Teresa reminded us that what truly matters is love. Today, more than 100 years after her death, Thérèse remains one of the world's most popular saints. Her tomb in Lisieux is visited by millions of pilgrims every year. Her book, Story of a Soul, has been translated into more than 50 languages and has sold millions of copies. Her relics have traveled the world, carried in pilgrimages to cities and countries on every continent. And wherever she goes, Teresa continues to shower down her roses. Testimonies of healings, conversions, comfort in difficult times, clarity in important decisions. The roses fall silently, gently, constantly, just as she lived, silently, gently, and steadily. But the greatest rose Teresa left us is not a spectacular miracle or a physical cure. It is something deeper, the gift of understanding that you, exactly as you are, with all your smallness and limitations, are infinitely loved by, and that this smallness is not an obstacle to holiness, but the surest path to it. If you feel lost in the vastness of the world, if you constantly compare yourself to others and feel inadequate, if you think your life is too ordinary to matter, Teresa's life is like a rose gently falling upon your head, a rose that whispers, "You are loved, you are valuable, your littleness is precious, your ordinary life can be extraordinarily holy." Teresa kept her promise. She spent her heaven doing good on earth, and she continues to do so, one rose at a time, one heart at a time, one small soul at a time, that discovers that small does not mean insignificant. Because in God's eyes, love is never small. And a life lived with love, no matter how ordinary it may seem, is infinitely great. You have heard Teresa's story. You have walked with her from childhood to death. You have seen how she discovered her little way and how she lived it to the very end. But perhaps now you wonder, how is this lived today? How does Teresa's little way apply in the modern world, so different from the cloistered convent of the 19th century? The beautiful truth is that the little path is perhaps more relevant today than ever, because we live in a world that constantly screams at us that we are not enough. A world of social media where we constantly compare ourselves to the seemingly perfect lives of others. A world of crushing expectations where there is always something more we should achieve, something more we should be. And in the midst of all that noise, Teresa whispers to us, "Be small, trust, love." But let's be specific. How does this look in your daily life? Let's start in the morning. You wake up tired. Perhaps you slept poorly. You have a busy day ahead. Work, responsibilities, people who depend on you. Anxiety is already rising in your chest before you even get out of bed. Teresa's little way invites you to pause. Before checking your phone, before thinking about your to-do list, offer the day, not with complicated words. Simply, "God, this day is yours. I am small, but I trust in you. Help me to love today." That's all. A moment of childlike surrender before facing the day. Then you go to work or to school, or you stay home with your household responsibilities. And there, in the ordinary, is where the little path comes alive. Because Teresa doesn't ask you to do extraordinary things. She asks you to do the ordinary with extraordinary love. You're in a boring meeting. Instead of just impatiently enduring it, Offer it up. This hour of boredom, I give it to you, God. For someone who is suffering more than I am right now. It's a flower. Small, invisible, but real. A co-worker is particularly difficult today. They criticize you, interrupt you, and make your task harder. Your instinctive reaction is to defend yourself or counterattack. The path invites you to stop, to breathe, to see Christ in that difficult person, and to respond with kindness even when your ego wants to respond harshly. It's another flower. You're stuck in traffic. Someone cuts you off abruptly. Your first impulse is anger, but you remember smallness, trust, love. You let go of the anger. You offer it up. You forgive the driver who doesn't even know they need your forgiveness. One more flower. You arrive home exhausted. Your family needs your attention, but all you want to do is collapse on the sofa. The little path doesn't tell you to ignore your real needs, but it does invite you to ask yourself, can I give even just 15 more minutes? Can I listen to this story my child wants to tell me? Can I ask my partner how their day was before talking about mine? These small acts of love when you're tired are the most precious flowers, because they cost something, because they require dying to yourself, because they are genuinely sacrificial, and God sees them, every single one. But let's be honest, some days you'll fail, some days you'll lose your temper, some days you'll snap, some days you'll be selfish. So what? This is where Therese's teaching on mercy becomes crucial. When you fail, don't stay on the ground in anguish. Don't give in to paralyzing self-criticism. Get up immediately, like a child who falls and gets up without drama, and carry on. I'm sorry, Jesus. I know I'm small. I trust in your mercy. Try again with me. This is liberating, because it breaks the toxic cycle of perfectionism, failure, guilt, and despair. Instead, it establishes a healthier rhythm. I try, I fail. I get up, I trust, I try again, like a child learning to walk, with patience, with peace, with confidence that the Father is there to lift you up as many times as necessary. And what about big decisions? How do you apply the little path when you face an important choice, a job change, a move, a decision about a relationship? Theresa would tell you, don't worry so much. Do what you can to discern well. Pray, think, seek advice. But in the end, choose peacefully, trusting that if you make a mistake, God can write straight, even with your crooked lines. You don't need absolute certainty. You need childlike trust that your Father guides you even through your mistakes. This trust is not irresponsibility. It is not making rash decisions. It is recognizing that, after doing your best, the outcome is in God's hands. And you can rest in that. And in times of suffering, when illness, loss, or pain that you cannot avoid or control arrives, how does the little path help? Theresa doesn't tell you that suffering doesn't hurt. She doesn't ask you to enjoy it or pretend it doesn't exist. Suffering is real and terrible, but she invites you not to suffer alone, to take Jesus' hand while you suffer, to offer your pain along with his on the cross, to trust that even this in some mysterious way can have a purpose. You won't always understand the purpose. Theresa herself didn't understand why she had to suffer her dark night, but she trusted. And that trust didn't eliminate the pain, but it made it bearable. It transformed it from dead weight into a living offering. If you're going through your own dark night right now, if God seems silent, if your prayers seem to bounce off the ceiling, the little path tells you, keep going. One more step, one more moment, one more day. Not because it's easy, but because Jesus walks with you even when you don't feel it. And at the end of this night, there's a sunrise waiting. But the little path isn't just for dramatic moments. It's above all a spirituality of the ordinary, of days that seem like any other, of routines that can become tedious, of repetitive tasks that seem pointless. Theresa teaches you that it is precisely there, in the seemingly insignificant, that holiness is built. In washing the dishes after dinner, in folding the laundry, in answering that email, in making that call you've been putting off, in getting out of bed when you'd rather stay in. In each of those ordinary moments, there is an opportunity for love, a flower you can offer. And here's the secret that transforms everything. It's not the size of the action that matters, but the love with which you do it. A dish washed with love is more valuable in God's eyes than a great work done without love. A good morning, said with genuine kindness, is worth more than 1,000 beautiful words spoken out of obligation. How do you cultivate that love, Teresa would say? By looking at Jesus, by spending time with him, by talking to him throughout the day, in your own words, without formalities. Jesus, this is difficult. Help me. Thank you for this beautiful moment. I'm tired, but I love you. Constant conversation with the one who is your closest friend. And by reading the Gospels. Teresa loved them passionately. She read them again and again until she knew them by heart, because in the Gospels she found Jesus directly, without intermediary. There she saw his tenderness, his mercy, his love for the little ones, and that nourished her faith. If you feel your spiritual life is dry, if prayer has become a burdensome obligation, if you have lost the joy of your faith, return to the Gospels. Read them not as ancient texts, but as a love letter written to you. Seek Jesus there, and let him find you. The path also invites you to live in the present, not to worry about tomorrow, not to get stuck in yesterday's mistakes. Now, this moment, this is the only moment you have to love. Take advantage of it. Teresa wrote, I cannot dwell on the past. That would be to doubt divine mercy. As for the future, I do not dwell on it either. I will do what I must do today. The rest is not my concern. What liberating wisdom. The past is under God's mercy. The future is in his hands. You only have the present. And in this now, you can love. You can trust. You can be small without worry. Because your Father cares for you. As he cares for the flowers of the field and the birds of the air, so he cares for you. Even more so, because you are his beloved child. Teresa's little path, ultimately, is an invitation to freedom. Freedom from crushing expectations. Freedom from constant comparison. Freedom from paralyzing perfectionism. Freedom from the fear of failure. Freedom to be who you are, small but infinitely loved. You don't need to be smarter. You don't need to be more talented. You don't need to be stronger. You just need to be you, offering the little you have with all the love you can muster. And God will do the rest. Because here is the promise of the little path. If you give your smallness to God, he will transform it into greatness. If you offer your 5 loaves and 2 fish, he will multiply them. If you plant your mustard seed, he will turn it into a tree. Your part is small. God's is infinite. So tonight, as Teresa's story ends and sleep approaches, I invite you to take her little path as your own. Not tomorrow. Now. This very moment. Offer your smallness. Trust in her love. And begin to walk, step by step, flower by flower, moment by moment, towards the heart of the God who has always loved you and will love you for all eternity. And now we are reaching the end of this evening together. You have walked with Teresa from her birth to her death, from her humble beginnings to her hidden greatness. You have seen how a simple flower can perfume an entire cathedral, how an ordinary life can be extraordinarily holy. But before you drift off to sleep, I need to tell you something important. Something Teresa would like you to hear directly, without intermediaries, heart to heart. You are that little flower. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how many mistakes you've made. It doesn't matter how many times you've failed or how far you've strayed. It doesn't matter how ordinary your life seems, or how insignificant your efforts appear. In God's eyes, you are a precious flower, unique, irreplaceable, infinitely loved. And God doesn't love you for what you achieve. He doesn't love you for what you produce. He doesn't love you for your success or your perfection. He loves you because you are his son, his daughter, created in his image, redeemed by his blood, indwelt by his spirit. Teresa discovered that she could reach God's heart not through her own strength, but by letting Him guide her. Not by climbing impossible mountains, but by accepting her smallness in His arms. And that discovery set her completely free. That same liberation is available to you tonight. If you've spent years trying to be good enough and always feeling like a failure, stop. God isn't asking you to be good enough. He's asking you to trust that He's good enough for both of you. If you've constantly compared yourself to others and felt inferior, stop. God didn't make you to be like others. He made you to be you. And that uniqueness is His gift, not your flaw. If you've ever felt that your life is too small to matter, that your efforts are too insignificant to make a difference, stop. Before God, nothing done with love is small. Nothing offered from the heart is insignificant. Teresa lived for 24 years. She never left her small convent. She never preached to crowds. She never performed miracles in her lifetime. She never founded institutions. She never wrote theological treatises. She simply lived. She loved. She trusted. She was humble. And He changed the world. Not because she was special in the sense of possessing extraordinary talents, but because she discovered the secret that God wants us all to discover, that He can do extraordinary things with our ordinariness if we surrender it to Him with trust. So tonight, as your eyes close and your body relaxes into rest, I invite you to surrender your smallness, surrender your fears, surrender your insecurities, surrender your feeling of not being enough. Place them in God's arms like a small child places their problems in their Father's hands, and rest. God will take care of it. God is already taking care of it. God has always taken care of you, even when you haven't felt it. Teresa promises you a shower of roses, and she will keep her promise. But the most important rose she can give you is not an external miracle, but an inner truth, that you are loved, completely, infinitely, unconditionally. Let that truth settle in your heart like snow falling gently on a silent field. Let it cover all your wounds, all your doubts, all your fears. Let it envelop you in a peace that surpasses all understanding. You are small, yes, but you are infinitely precious. You are weak, yes, but your weakness is the perfect space for God's strength to manifest itself. You are ordinary, yes, but what is ordinary, lived with love, becomes extraordinary in the eyes of God. And tomorrow, when you wake up, you don't need to become someone different. You don't need to accomplish impressive things. You don't need to impress anyone, not even yourself. All you need to do is be yourself, small, trusting, loving in the ordinary, casting your flowers, one at a time, moment by moment, at the feet of the God who loves you more than you can comprehend. The path is right beneath your feet. It's not complicated. It's not impossible. It's not reserved for special souls. It's for you. Exactly for you. With all your smallness and all your limitations. Begin tomorrow. Or better yet, begin right now with this simple act. Close your eyes and whisper, as Teresa whispered before she died, "My God, I love you." You don't need to feel anything special when you say it. It doesn't need to be accompanied by heightened emotions. Just say it, with intention, with the confidence of someone who knows they are heard and loved. My God, I love you. And now, sleep in peace. Sleep like a child in its father's arm. Sleep knowing that you are watched over, protected, and loved while you rest. Sleep trusting that tomorrow is a new day to love, to trust, to be small in the arms of the immense God. Teresa walks with you now, together with all the saints, together with all those who have discovered before you the path of childlike trust. You are not alone in your smallness. You are accompanied by a cloud of witnesses who encourage you. Keep going. It is worth it. Love is real, and you are infinitely loved. May Teresa's roses fall softly upon you tonight. May her confidence fill you with courage. May her humility free you from crushing expectations. May her love inspire you to love even just a little tomorrow. and that you may discover, little by little, day by day, that the little path is not just Therese's way. It is your way. The way that God designed specifically for you from all eternity. Walk with confidence, little flower. Your fragrance is precious to God. Your life matters. Your love transforms the world, one little flower at a time. Good night. Rest in peace. And may you wake up tomorrow refreshed, ready to scatter your own roses upon the world that so desperately needs them. This has been the story of Saint Thérèse of Lisieux on Saints to Sleep By. A little flower that perfumed the whole world. An ordinary life that became extraordinarily holy. A little path that is open to everyone. If this story has touched your heart, if you have found comfort or inspiration in it, share it with someone who also needs to hear that their smallness is precious. And always remember Therese's final words. My vocation is love. May that also be your calling, tomorrow and every day that God grants you, until the next story, until the next saint who keeps you company at night, until the next message of hope you need to hear. Sleep well. You are loved, infinitely loved. Good night.